This is a story about dignity, after life takes back what it once gave. Eric Nelson stood in the break room long after the others had left, holding a paper cup that had already gone cold. The vending machines hummed softly, the same sound he'd heard for years, but tonight it felt out of place. Everything did. Just weeks ago, this room had felt different, lighter. He had walked through the warehouse with a sense of arrival he didn't quite trust. People greeted him by name, asked his opinion, waited for his word before moving on. Success had come late and quietly, but it had come, and now something inside him wouldn't settle. Eric stared at the cup in his hand and wondered why relief had never fully arrived. Why, even as things improved, a thin unease had followed him like a shadow. Not fear, not exactly, more like the feeling that something borrowed was about to be reclaimed. The promotion had changed his schedule, not his habits. He still arrived early, still checked the loading bays himself, still fixed problems before anyone noticed them. The respect felt real and fragile. That afternoon, his supervisor had asked him to stop by the office for a minute. The tone was careful, too careful. Eric had nodded, finished his shift, and waited. Now, standing alone, he realized he hadn't wanted the meeting to happen. Not because he expected bad news, but because something already felt wrong. At 56, he had learned to trust that feeling. He thought of Meg at home, moving through the kitchen the way she always did, steady and unhurried. Of Rose and Jason, growing into themselves with a confidence he'd helped build without ever noticing when it happened. Of Brandy, waiting by the door at the same hour every evening. Eric set the cup down untouched. Whatever was coming, it would not announce itself loudly. Life rarely did. It shifted quietly, politely, and only afterward did you realize the ground had moved. He took a breath and walked toward the office door, already sensing that the version of himself who entered would not be the one who came back out. The meeting lasted less than 10 minutes. There was no argument, no raised voices, just careful sentences delivered in a tone meant to soften impact. Corporate language, restructuring, budget realignment, a decision made somewhere far from the warehouse floor. Eric listened without interrupting. The position he'd stepped into, the one that had finally made the years feel coherent, was being eliminated. Not because he'd failed, not because of anything he'd done wrong, simply because the numbers no longer justified it. He nodded once. When he stood to leave, the supervisor hesitated, as if wanting to say more. Eric didn't wait. Some things didn't need explanation. Back on the floor, the noise of the warehouse rushed back to meet him. Forklifts moved, pallets shifted. The rhythm continued, indifferent. He moved through it like someone passing through a place he no longer quite belonged to. By the end of the shift, the news had traveled. Not loudly, just enough. People avoided his eyes. A few offered quiet words. Most didn't know what to say. Eric clocked out at the same time he always did. At home, Meg knew before he said anything. He hung his jacket in its place, washed his hands longer than usual, and finally sat down at the kitchen table. "They took it back," he said. Meg reached across the table and held his hand. No questions. No disbelief. That night, after the house had settled and Brandy lay asleep at the foot of the bed, Eric stared at the ceiling and felt something collapse inside him. Not anger, meaning. If the recognition could disappear this easily, what had it been worth? What had all those years actually been building toward? The success hadn't just given him relief. It had given him a story about himself, one he had quietly begun to believe. And now that story was gone. Eric turned onto his side, careful not to wake Meg. For the first time in decades, he didn't know who he was supposed to be in the morning. The days that followed felt hollowed out. Eric returned to his old position without ceremony. Same vest, same schedule, same tasks. The difference lived entirely inside him. Every movement now carried an echo of what had been, of what had almost felt permanent. People treated him gently, which hurt more than indifference ever had. He caught himself working slower, not from fatigue, but from hesitation. As if the work no longer knew him, as if he were borrowing motions from a version of himself that had briefly existed and then been erased. At lunch, he sat alone, staring at a spot on the table worn smooth by years of elbows and hands. He remembered the pride he'd felt not long ago. Not loud pride, but the quiet satisfaction of finally understanding why he had stayed so long. Now that understanding unraveled. Who am I if I'm not the man they trusted? Was that respect real or temporary permission? The questions followed him home. Meg noticed the change in his silence. The way he answered in fewer words. The way he avoided her eyes when she asked about his day. She didn't push. She knew better. But the space between them felt heavier than before. Not distant, just burdened. One evening, Rose asked, "Did you do something wrong?" Eric shook his head. "No." The answer didn't comfort either of them. Later, alone in the garage, Eric opened an old notebook where he'd once written down goals. Small ones, practical ones. None of them mentioned recognition. None of them promised reward. He closed the notebook and sat there in the dim light, hands resting uselessly in his lap. For years, he had believed that staying meant something would eventually arrive to justify the cost. Now he was forced to face a harder truth. Staying had never come with guarantees, only choice, and for the first time, Eric wasn't sure what choice still belonged to him. The breaking point didn't come with drama. It arrived one evening when Eric realized he was beginning to resent the work itself, the very thing that had once anchored him. The resentment startled him. He had never blamed the job before. He had blamed time, luck, circumstance, but never the work. That scared him. He sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, the house breathing softly around him. Meg noticed the light still on and joined him without speaking. She poured herself a glass of water and waited. "I don't know how to carry this," Eric said finally. "Not the loss, the meaning of it." Meg listened the way she always had, without trying to fix what wasn't broken, only wounded. "You're still the same man," she said. Even if they forgot for a while, the words didn't heal him, but they steadied him. The next day, Eric made a decision that surprised even him. He stopped trying to reclaim what had been taken. He didn't argue, didn't push, didn't quietly hope someone would notice the mistake and reverse it. Instead, he chose how he would stand inside the loss. He worked carefully again. Not faster, not harder, just honestly. He helped without calculating whether it would be remembered. He spoke when guidance was needed and stayed silent when it wasn't. When bitterness surfaced, and it did, he didn't feed it. He let it pass through without letting it decide his posture. One afternoon, a new hire struggled with a load and nearly injured himself. Eric stepped in instinctively, guiding him through the motion, explaining where the body gives out if you're careless. The kid listened, really listened. "Thanks," he said afterward. "No one ever explains it like that." Eric felt something shift. Not pride, purpose. He realized then that dignity wasn't about keeping what you earned. It was about refusing to become smaller when it's taken away. That night, as Brandy rested her head on his foot and Meg leaned quietly against him on the couch, Eric understood something he hadn't before. The loss hadn't erased him. It had clarified him. The warehouse looked the same as it always had. The same concrete floors. The same early light slipping in through high windows. The same noise that once felt endless and now felt familiar again. Not comforting, not cruel, just honest. Eric moved through it with steadier hands. Not because things had been restored. They hadn't. The title was gone. The pay bump was gone. The brief sense of arrival had passed like a season that didn't linger. What remained surprised him. People still came to him with questions. Not officially, not because of position, but because trust, once earned honestly, didn't vanish with paperwork. He answered when asked, helped when needed, stepped back when it wasn't his place. At home, the atmosphere softened. Meg laughed more easily again. Rose stopped watching him with concern. Jason asked for advice without hesitation. Brandy followed him room to room, content, untroubled by status or change. One evening, Eric found himself fixing a broken shelf for a neighbor. No pay, no thanks beyond a nod and a quiet smile. As he tightened the last screw, he felt something settle fully into place. He no longer needed the story success had briefly given him. The loss had stripped away what wasn't essential, and left behind what could endure without permission. Eric locked the door behind him and walked home under a darkening sky. The same street, the same steps, but a different understanding carried inside him now. Success had come, success had gone, character stayed, and for the first time since the ground had shifted beneath him, Eric knew exactly where he stood.